Hi, my name is Harry Dean Hudson, and you are listening to Probably Designed. In this week's episode, I had a conversation with Gabe Carleton-Barnes. Gabe is actually an old friend of mine, and this conversation is a little bit different from what you've heard so far on the podcast because Gabe isn't a game designer. Gabe is a professional Magic the Gathering player. So we've talked a lot about collectible card games, drafting, and these sorts of things. And I thought it'd be really interesting to get a high level perspective from a player. So our conversation spanned a bunch of topics from drafting to deck design, but mostly from a high level player's perspective. I asked Gabe to introduce himself, so let's just go ahead and get started.
My name is Gabe Carleton-Barnes. I am a lifelong gamer. My father identified that I liked math. My father, who was a poet when I was a kid, and forced me to play a game of chess with him every weekend starting at age 5. And I didn't get interested until middle school, and then I fell in love with games at that time. I became the first board on the chess team in high school very quickly, where I learned about Magic the Gathering, and I've been playing Magic since 1994. And I won my first Magic tournament that I ever played. And I think that in the area of the states where I live, in Portland, Oregon, and sort of Seattle, Washington area, there are definitely periods of time where I've been the consensus best competitive Magic player. You know, I have a little bit of minor subculture fame in that area. And so I've played on the Magic Pro Tour 16 or 17 times, traveled all over the world doing that. And that's really my relationship with games, is deeply connected to Magic, which I simply cannot stop thinking about.
And that's also, I guess, as by way of introduction, how we met, right? So I was trying to think about it, and I think that the first time that you and I met, you and Seamus were up for a PTQ, a Pro Tour qualifier, if such things exist anymore, up in Seattle. And Seamus asked if you guys could stay the night because you were grinding like for a Pro Tour or whatever. Yep. We went to the tournament. I met you at the tournament. We hung out. You went deep into the tournament. You won the tournament.
Yeah.
We hung out at some bars and stuff afterwards. We ended up back at my house. And I think that the memorable bit is that they gave you this little cup, like a trophy that was like a little cup for like winning the PTQ. And then we had some, definitely not champagne, but some sort of sparkling, sparkling wine that we drank from the cup, which was pretty fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have that trophy still. It's just over there. That was the largest PTQ that ever took place in the Northwest. So that was a really proud moment for me to win that one. And it was it was a really fun event. That specific type of tournament doesn't exist anymore, but there's still a lot of those types of events. And yeah, it was a wonderful introduction to you. You put us up. We took the train up on Friday so that we could practice on the train. Spent Friday night at your place.
That's right. Okay. That's right. Okay. It was a couple days then.
Yeah, it was, and most of the time was the tournament Saturday when, we were all at the event center. But yeah, and from there, I think the first time we spent together, having it be exciting and fun, and obviously we became friends, which we've maintained across international borders. I guess you're good at that, though.
I mean, I have to some degree, being an expat or whatever else and living abroad or whatever. I value my friendships, and so I try to do some amount of friendship outreach that allows me to keep some international friendships alive. So that's part of the routine, I guess. And that was quite a long time ago, right? So
it was.
You're still grinding. You still play a lot. You still have been to Pro Tours, I think, since then.
Absolutely.
And I thought you would be a really interesting guest because I've been talking to game designers who work in the digital space and with a lot of games that are, I think, pretty strongly influenced by Magic in a lot of ways. So a lot of games that have carried the metaphors of drafting, the metaphors of cards
Hmm.
into the digital space. And, we haven't talked about this at all, but I don't know how familiar you are with some of these games, but there's this whole like subgenre of they're called roguelike deck builders. But to me, it's funny because when I was a kid, I certainly played Rogue, the video game, but it was in the basement of my friend's house on his dad's 386 or whatever. We would play this game because we wanted to play D&D. And it's kind of like D&D random encounters. It was kind of like role-playing themes or whatever else. And so that was always in my brain, like what Rogue was. And of course, I'm old and many things have happened in the intervening years. And in a lot of cases with these deck builders, you have a lot of Dominion influence and this build as you go sort of mechanics, but also I feel like the genre has a lot of like board game mechanics. So I guess the biggest game in that subgenre would be Slay the Spire, which might be familiar to you as well.
So one of my curses of learning about Magic early on is that Magic is such a good game that it kind of stopped me from exploring more games. I'm a little bit deeply obsessed with it, and so I have not played nearly as many games as somebody who loves games as much as I do normally would. So you can brief me a little bit on what these types of games are, if you want. Yeah, as I said, I think Magic is, you talk about being an inspiration for a lot of other games. And when I do learn other games, I'm always a little bit trying to make them magic in my mind.
It's the first collectible card,
Hmm.
first deck building type of game that there was. And so a lot of games are drawing inspiration from that. I think that the inspiration is this drafting idea where you start with nothing and then okay, you're given a choice, you have to choose a card, and then there's a bit of randomness involved in what you're choosing, and you start to build the deck over time and over the course of a run. And over the course of a run, you will kind of, like in a draft, you'll get kind of a certain deck identity. You'll maybe find some sort of archetype or something that's kind of interesting there to play. And then a lot of these games actually tend to be single player rather than multiplayer games. And so there's a little bit of difference in terms of the mechanics from Magic, because Magic has this symmetric element, right?
Hmm.
And then there's kind of different ways that the meta game plays out, and there's different kind of community reactions or feelings about, say, like broken combo decks or whatever else, right? Because I think that one of the things I've learned from talking to some of these designers is that in my brain, because I'm also not as deep of a Magic player as you are, but I'm pretty Magic pilled in terms of like how I think about any game that involves different cards and collectible card pools or whatever. Because these games are single player and they can kind of end up being more about like the player's power fantasy, there's a lot more space for you to just kind of let a player have something broken. Whereas, like in a symmetric game where you have a competition, it just feels bad when you
Yeah.
have broken cards, etc. But aside from that, like I think that that's a fundamental difference, but there's a lot I think kind of going on in how these games work with regard to drafting cards and kind of building a deck as you go or building a strategy as you go.
Right. Yeah. So I do believe I've played some of these games. I couldn't name them, but our common friend Seamus occasionally gets me a little bit of an introduction to different games.
Yeah, and so I think that the thing that's interesting and the kind of the core, kind of the MacGuffin for this podcast, and it is a MacGuffin because it's like we'll go where the conversation takes us, but it's about how these game designers and I think kind of designers in general are designing either for or around randomness and chance. And so I think it's kind of an interesting space to explore. I know you are an avid and very strong limited player.
Hmm.
So you've spent a lot of time dealing with both drafting mechanics and making the most of whatever cards you're pulling, but then also mixing that a little bit with, of course, your skill as a player. I think that the constructed deck building stuff is pretty interesting also. One of the things that I feel like the answer to that I maybe am misquoting, it's something like Magic is such a high variance game that if you're one of the better players playing one of the best decks, you still like have something like a 65% win rate. Is that right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The best players in the world. They have like websites where you can go and look at the history of basically like ELO ratings for competitive Magic players and see the best players and their win rates at the biggest events. And yeah, they don't get much higher than 65%. That would be an amazing, amazing win rate.
Is it closer to 60 or?
Yes. Yeah, 60 is much more
Okay,
common.
interesting.
So have you heard recently, maybe not recently, but Roger Federer did a like graduation speech?
I think I saw something in my YouTube about this because it's like there's something crazy with tennis where a very small
Yes.
percentage adds up to huge win rates or something. Is that right?
Yeah, the percentage of points that he won over his tennis career, legendary tennis career, was 54%.
That's wild.
Yeah. And so it's interesting, like Magic offers something that chess doesn't for me, which is that every match is a challenge, but it's also a possibility. Like I can play against the best players in the world and know, they're better than me. But playing against them, the match can still be interesting because of the variance in the game. And it makes them continue to play their best the whole time and not, take it easy because they know they can beat me. And so I get to learn more from them in those moments. The element of randomness really makes the game so much more interesting. Even at the same time, it sometimes makes it more frustrating. And one of the things that I've learned from that is the thing that Roger Federer talks about, which is acceptance. Like, we curse our bad luck in the world. We complain about things going wrong. But if you want to be successful in any game that involves a lot of randomness and you want to really care about the results, professional poker players, of course, will tell you this. Mm-hmm. You have to take the bad beats, the unlucky moments, and put them behind you and move on to the next game. Because they're going to happen. And if you let them get to you, then you've basically given up. You've lost your chance to do well at an event. And that's honestly an incredible life skill. And so one of the things for me when I talk to people who aren't gamers about gaming is how much I've learned from even just Magic about dealing with the world, about dealing with life. And randomness is a big part of that,
Yeah, it's like I'm always amazed because I think I've got streaks of being a decent Magic player, but I'm not, a great Magic player by any stretch of the imagination. But there's this patience with kind of doing the operational stuff like very diligently and thoroughly that really strong players and successful players have. Uh-huh. And it's like you're running bad, but you're still like operational tip top because you're trying to accumulate all these little edges in order to just make sure that if something swings your way that you're set up for it, right? And it's really like it's very disciplined.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And my proudest moments as a Magic player are when I've successfully overcome that sort of sense of bad luck and that sort of discipline. There was a Magic player from Seattle who, when I was coming up, was one of the best players in the area. His name was Mike Thompson, and I was at a tournament with him, and I knew him. He had driven down to Portland for this Magic tournament, and it was a sealed deck, where you're opening your random cards, and you got to work with what you get. And the sealed deck he got was really unlucky. He looked at it and he was like, "This is not good. There's nothing I can do here." He looked around and he tried to figure out if he could come up with an excuse to leave the tournament and get a refund, which you can't do. But he was like, "Oh my gosh, this is terrible. I can't believe I drove to Portland for this. I'm so unlucky." But instead of that, he made the best of it. And he made the elimination rounds of the tournament where he beat me and he won that tournament. And I thought, this is what I want to be able to do. I want to be able to walk in the door, have everything go wrong right from the start and still persevere. And it's funny that weekend I met you, it was a sealed deck tournament, and I opened my sealed deck and it looked okay, but it had no rares that I could play in my deck. Mm-hmm. And rares are usually the big, powerful cards. Like you're looking for, can I get some good rares? And this was one of the biggest, like I said, one of the biggest tournaments I've played in at a PTQ level, the biggest one ever in the Northwest. It was going to be so many rounds. And to go through that many rounds without any rares, it just didn't seem possible. But I was able to focus that day. I said, that's okay. I'm going to roll with the punches and make the most of it. And so that's one of the reasons that I actually have that cheesy plastic trophy in the corner still, is because I'm proud of that one, you know?
Well, and it's funny because you got to drink champagne out of it. Or, I mean, not champagne, but Prosecco, right?
You can call it champagne.
Not in Europe. No, we can't.
French authorities might get us.
Yeah, that's true. So getting into that, right, around the kind of the deck building and kind of how you approach it. I know, I mean, so sealed is incredibly high variance just because you have no decisions that you can make to kind of affect your card pool. But drafting can be a bit more consistent, even though you're in the face of variance. I guess I don't even know how to form the question, but it's like, how do you manage variance? Because you're a pretty regular drafter, right? So
Yeah.
you're drafting probably many times a week or multiple at least.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've got like a pretty decent win rate with regard to drafting. And like, so how much of it is like operational during play and how much of it is at the drafting table pulling the right cards? Because it's a mix of both. And obviously you're a very strong player.
It's definitely a mix of both, but of course, the cards you put together make such a difference. And every draft is different. Some of them make it easy for you. And I think that's one of the traps. One of the challenges with variance is that sometimes it goes your way. And
Right.
that can teach you bad habits. So, one of the things that I try to do, I think one of my strengths and maybe one of my weaknesses is that I like to win the hard way. So I'm not afraid of things going wrong. And Magic's a classic example is, you usually draft when you're putting your deck together, you play 2 out of the 5 colors. And so if you're drafting and you find out the people taking from the other packs are taking the colors that you tried to take, and they're just not there, you're going to get weaker cards. Your deck is going to be weaker.
Right.
And the thing that you have to be ready to do is to change plans. You get enough cards that you can change into different colors if you figure it out soon enough. And so one of the ways you deal with a random future basically is you keep an open mind about what could be and don't convince yourself that everything's going to go right from the start.
Yeah.
In Magic, a lot of people talk about the various concepts with this, with how sort of like submissive versus assertive you are in your drafting. Because, if I pick all the red cards that I see, it makes it less likely someone else will take it into the red cards. But it doesn't mean for sure that they won't. Obviously, two assertive players are going to mess each other up. This is what a version of the prisoner's dilemma in a way.
Well, okay, so like now I'm just gonna drill you for strategy or whatever. Well, like,
Yeah.
what's the latest pick that you would switch, like a plan or colors? Like, so you're picking 45 cards. You're planning on keeping 23 of them, or putting 22 or 23 in your deck or whatever. Maybe 24, depends on the set, right?
Mhm.
But when's the latest you change gears?
I don't have a specific time that's the latest.
Yeah.
When I was playing, the era that I met you, I remember in a specific draft after the first pack, which is the first 15 cards,
What set was that, by the way? I don't remember what set that was.
Return to Ravnica.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
After the first pack, I had not identified what colors I should be in yet. And I looked at my pool of cards and I had almost a perfect balance across all the colors of things that I had taken. But I was perfectly happy with that because by the end of the pack, I had identified what was possible. And most Magic players, they decide in the first 2 or 3 picks what colors they're drafting, and they sort of stick with that.
Like, you identified what was possible by the card pool that you saw and kind of what you saw at the table?
Yes. You learn the most from the packs that you saw come all the way around to you. So, I took a card and I know that, hey, there's this many red cards, this many black cards, etc., that are worthwhile. And when it comes around the table, what's left over? People will talk about reading the signals, and they can be really, really hard to identify. Maybe somebody took a card and immediately decided they're not going to be in that color. Nothing is certain.
Yeah.
But with Magic, and when I've played a lot with a certain set, as I had with Return to Ravnica, there's almost an intuition that gets built up. It's like there's a part of my brain that is doing this job for me, and I have a feel about what's happening. And so the strategy in draft, if you want to be really successful, involves the question of how much work you can put in to learn about that format. The most successful strategy, if you haven't played very much, you don't know it super well, is to identify a good color combination or two and try to draft that strategy every time.
But so like if you're in this draft, right? And oh, what am I thinking? It's like how much of it is like you've just learned the set so well that it's what system one thinking or whatever. Is it really just like a hunch, or are you kind of mathing the whole thing out?
I'm definitely not mathing the whole thing out. A lot of competitive Magic players will talk about that and doing sort of these equations. What are the odds of X, Y, Z? And I think when you do equations like that with a game like Magic, your inputs are almost always wrong. And so the precision is a trick. If that makes sense.
Right, I see. Yeah. It's like false precision or whatever.
And if it helps people make decisions, that's great for them. But I do it definitely more by instinct. And depending on what the set is, I have sort of these identifications of what's important and where the scarcity is. So classic scarcity from Return to Ravnica was quality 2-mana spells, so turn 2 plays. And you need a lot of those in that particular format because of the way it worked. It's actually very common in Magic for you to need a lot of those. But they make more of them now than they did then. So in looking at what to do when I haven't figured out what deck I want to draft and I have these cards in front of me, I'm going to keep that in mind. Which colors did I get a couple of 2-drops in? Or which colors are those coming around the table? And I can identify them. So little things like that. I build up anxiety as I'm drafting about what I'm missing, what I don't have. Right? And one of those things is I don't have a decision about what colors I want to be. But I'm comfortable with that anxiety, and it builds over time. So I've switched colors very, very late in drafts before. And one of the beautiful things about Magic's design is, usually you're doing 2 colors. So if you have 2 colors and you have to switch out of one of them and switch into another, you at least have the color that you kept, that you have sort of a backbone. So that allows you to sort of, if you think about it, switch a lot later. If I switch halfway through the draft, I only lose half of my picks.
Right. Or maybe you'll get some sort of color fixing and splash the 3rd color or something along those lines, depending on the set, I guess.
Yes. And yeah, the idea of don't get attached to what you've done is the way to be the most successful, but only if you have that ability to identify the points of anxiety, right? Once you're good at that, then you can do what they call hard mode drafting, right? I'm going to get the best possible deck I could from any given point in the draft forward. Whereas if you don't know it well, that's what I was saying before, you have to sort of make this choice of like, the most successful thing I can do is to be forceful and say, I'm just going to draft this one strategy. And then from the start, you don't miss any opportunities to take cards for that. But it can go very badly, of course, if the table doesn't happen to cooperate with what you're doing.
Pack 3? Have you switched strategies like 3rd pack? Or
yes.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Absolutely.
Because it's pretty fascinating. Because I've definitely, I've drafted a fair amount, not like crazy amount, but a fair amount. And I've certainly switched strategies like 2nd pack or whatever, especially when you start seeing the cards go the other direction. You see different things based on what the table's taking or whatever else. But pack 3 is pretty well. I guess if you get a bomb, or is it like, what would cause you to switch your strategy that late? Just seeing a card that is a new possibility, I guess.
Yeah, I think certainly a bomb, you open something that's super, super powerful and you say, well, if and when I do draw this card, it's going to make such a difference that it's worth it. Because the other thing I had going on usually isn't looking like I want it to look, right? The other strategy isn't going well.
Yeah.
And I've done it many times. I've also drafted so many times that it's not like this happens very often. But usually also because, you do take 15 cards out of each pack, sometimes you happen to have a couple of cards of a color that are pretty good that just showed up and there was nothing else there. So when you switch, you have a little bit of a cushion in there. So have I taken my very first card in a color in pack 3 and then gone on to play that color? I think the answer is yes, but it would be such a rare occurrence. Obviously, like a very, very
I
special
mean,
case.
usually by pack 3, you've got like some jank in every color
Uh-huh.
from the end of the
Yeah.
the passing, or like you made a decision on a rare and then you ended up not seeing anything else in the color or something. So you were talking a bit also about what you were calling hard mode, and I want to
Uh-huh.
understand what that is a little bit better.
Yeah, hard mode is a way that Magic players in the competitive community talk about drafting, and different people feel differently about draft. It's generally a very popular way to play, but some folks who are more into the constructed style of Magic, where you plan every card and bring it in advance, they get nervous. They're not comfortable with the anxiety about the deck building as you go along. And so they do the other strategy, easy mode, which is to say, if you open, something really powerful in your first pack, you take it and then you try to draft that color, force a color, and then fill in with something else, whatever's kind of available, and try to build a deck that contains a lot of good cards. Hard mode is you try to build a deck that has not just good cards, but also more synergy, so cards that interact well together, which can be very scary to take a less powerful card, hoping to get another card later that interacts with it well, so you get more
Mm-hmm.
command power. Or being ready to switch, to be say, just to identify what is available at the table and to switch out, to abandon your early picks. And it's considered hard mode because if you guess wrong, right? If you make that switch and you didn't identify that it was correct to do so, well, now no matter where you end up, you've wasted picks. You've lost cards that you could have had that would have made your deck better. And so, yeah, hard mode is because you're concentrating the whole time. Easy mode, I think, if anyone plays Magic on Arena, it can be very easy to just be like, yes, another black card. It's got the more video game feel, and that feels like easy mode. You identify a couple of colors you want to pick, and then each pack comes up, and you just grab the best card in those colors. That's easy. What's hard is to look at that pack and be like, why is this red card here that's so good after 7 picks? Does this mean I need to change? Because you have to engage with each decision, and decision making is exhausting.
Yeah, totally.
I think it really identifies what people are in the game for, like what makes it fun for them, right? Are they in the game to solve a puzzle? Are they in the game for the you called it something earlier, like the god experience or being super powerful and feeling
The
powerful?
power fantasy. Yeah.
Power fantasy, yeah. So if you're in the game for power fantasy, there's no advantage to hard mode. You want your deck to be the most powerful one, so you don't want to risk bouncing around and figuring something out. Yeah.
And you see that though. You see that at the highest levels of competitive play, there are some players who are just like, okay, I'm gonna just try to force this particular deck in limited because I know that it's a powerful strategy, and that's just the way to win. I mean, I guess it makes sense. It's like when I say it out loud, it's like, oh yeah, of course you can do that.
Well, it's a way of increasing variance, and at the very highest levels of Magic, you kind of want higher variance in your results. I have not had high variance in my results on the Magic Pro Tour. I have, I think, a 55% win percentage. That's the very top level, but I almost always have a record of 9-7 at these tournaments, and there's 9-7 gets the same reward as 0-16. So you kind of want to have one tournament where you go 0-16, and one tournament where you go 14-2, and then you'll make it to the top 8, win thousands of dollars, and get on the big stage. So people at that level are sort of min-maxing their results, and so I actually think you don't see as consistent drafting at that level sometimes because people are trying to take the risk, right?
And I guess that this kind of gets into the other bit around constructed deck building, because what you see is, and their teams, they go into the tank and they try to find something that is a kind of weird high variance edge that they can get. And sometimes it works and sometimes it spectacularly fails, right? So
Uh-huh.
like the teams will go into this deck building hole for, 2 weeks or whatever, however long that they do it, and try to come up with something that's got this edge on the meta game, but everyone's kind of I don't know, angling against this hypothetical angling that's also happening in other places. And then there's some people who just show up with like the known best deck or whatever.
Right.
And so I think that's super interesting from the perspective of randomness and chance. And is that the right kind of takeaway?
Yeah, there's so much randomness in a Magic tournament environment, especially one where people are preparing really hard, like for one of the pro tours. And that thing you're talking about, the people, getting together in a house and building a deck and trying to address what is quote unquote the metagame. Well, I've done that. And you know what the hardest part is? It's identifying what the metagame is going to be.
Right, especially if a set's just come out, right? Because the pro tours are often scheduled where no one's actually won a major tournament with the cards yet.
Right, there's new cards that come out, and people work really fast in the online world is kind of amazing, and so people figure out strategies very quickly, and that happens online. But it's still a guessing game as to what other teams will decide, what other groups of people will decide. And one of the biggest skills in high level competitive Magic is just that one, just sort of understanding the wisdom of crowds and what will appeal to people.
And kind of, I guess, the psychology of the other top players, maybe.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And so there's this balance of how much do you try to play against the metagame and how much do you just try to optimize the effectiveness of the strategy you build yourself. And there are famous examples on both sides in the history of Magic where they were really, really successful. And so there's no definitive answer, which is one of the things that makes that really fun. And ultimately, Magic already allows your deck design to be sort of a stylistic choice. And I think that's one of the things that makes the game really have great staying power and continue to be fascinating, is that part of what affects those things is just what people like to do. And I guess that's sort of true in any sport. You talk about something like tennis, what players like to go to the net more, what skills they use. Everyone's a little bit unique. But Magic really expresses that, more than a game. I think like chess or poker, right, where there seems to be a very definitive understanding of what the correct play is, a high percentage of the time. And in Magic, it's not so much.
What's the wildest bet you've made on like a big tournament with a team or like some planning in terms of just like, okay, we're taking this crazy. Do you have any fun stories around some kind of crazy choices that you've made into the metagame?
Oh, what a good question. I have tended to make really conservative choices at the highest level, which I'm not happy about in my own history of decision making. But I'm trying to think of some. I have some bad examples. Oh, you know what? I have one good example. Actually, the second pro tour I ever went to. So the team I was working with was just one other person from the Portland area who qualified. Back in that time, it was hard to connect up over long distances with other people. This was like 2002. And we were trying to figure out what to do. And both of us were kind of new to this pro tour scene. But we got in touch with somebody who is a bit of a famous deck builder. And I don't know, Magic players may know this name. His name is Brian Kibler. And my friend connected with him online. And we didn't know what we wanted to do. And so we offered him a percentage of our winnings if he would share his strategy with us, the deck that he was going to come up with. And he shared something. He said, okay, great. And he shared a deck that was basically very similar to one we'd already been working on. For those who play Magic, it was a blue-black Psychotog deck, and it had a lot of strengths, but it wasn't, we thought, particularly good against some of the other strategies that were out there. But time was short, and so we found a very strange card that nobody else was trying to use at all, because the way it worked was it's a card called Sickening Dreams, and you pay 2 mana, whatever, that's a Magic thing, and you have to discard cards to make the card do anything. So you play it, and then you discard more cards, and it does damage to all the creatures in play equal to the number of cards you've discarded. Well, this is a kind of a classic bad Magic card. You don't want your cards to say discard cards on them. Often Magic comes down to a battle of attrition. The interesting thing was, one of the most dangerous cards for the Psychotog deck at the time was in this Goblins deck, which would just make a lot of really tiny creatures and spread them all over the board. And one of them had protection from all your blue spells, and you're a blue and black deck. So you needed a black card to deal with that. And everyone was using a card called Engineered Plague, which sounded like it would do the job, but it just didn't. We would test it, and it wouldn't work. So we knew this very popular deck that was going to give us trouble, and we discovered that this weird card really worked. And the reason it worked is because the Psychotog deck, its one area of strength was drawing more cards than your opponent. It had a ton of cards that let you just pick up more cards and more cards and more cards. So the disadvantage of this card was, pretty irrelevant in this particular deck. And so me and my friend, we were the only players to use this card on the Pro Tour. And it was one of the best Pro Tour finishes I had for a long time at this event. And we did better than Brian Kibler, who played his list. And we went to him before the tournament. We said, hey, we've solved the problem with the deck. It's the biggest issue. We're showing you this card. And he looked at us like we were crazy. And he was like, there's no way. It can't possibly be good. And he wouldn't even consider it or try it. And, he's known as a bit of a creative player too. So right. Willing to think about.
I love that stuff because I think that it's so like so many levels that you're trying to get into the structure of the event and the meta game and what cards people are playing. Mm-hmm. And I think that some of the stories I feel like are just kind of wild because people are in this crazy mode where they're just like, and then what if this, and then what if, and people just go so deep on these ideas that I don't know, I think it's super, super fun. Some of these deck building stories. Yeah.
It's so interesting to think about because, Magic has enough randomness and enough variables, including what your opponent decides to show up with, right? So you're talking about in your first episode, input randomness and output randomness. Right. Well, in Magic, your input randomness is what you bring in a way, right? There's maybe it's not the exact term, but I bring a deck, that's my input, and you bring a deck, and to me, that's output. So I have to deal with both of those things.
Yeah, I mean, the most crazy version of output randomness would be Chaos Orb or something like that, where it's okay, I'm just going to flip this thing and everything it touches because of the physics of the card flying around or is going to wreck shop on the table or whatever.
One of my favorite things to do in the world of Magic, constructed Magic, you talk about the metagame and the decks that everyone's really used to. And so that very, very often happens in constructed where you go to a tournament and 90% of what you see are very familiar and everyone's playing the same cards. And one of my things is that I will never do that without adding something a little strange, something that people won't be expecting or that isn't getting used in those decks, because you get so much advantage out of the randomness that you're providing to your opponent, right? Which is saying I'm not actually required to use all the strategies you read about online. It looks like I have that strategy, but I have this card that you didn't think about. And so you find a card that optimizes for the situations that your opponents assume cannot happen.
Right.
And how you can take advantage of those. And there's a beautiful sort of corollary to that, which is that now if someone's played against me before, they know that I do that. And that makes it so much harder for them to plan, even if I don't have any surprises for them.
Yeah, of course, playing tournaments, everyone who's done their homework has played the best deck and they've played against the best deck and they've played the top 4 decks, and against the top 4 decks, they've played against kind of the standard hot now deck lists, but just adding that operational confusion where they have to manage to reason about a card they haven't thought about is probably a weird psychological advantage, I guess I would say. But I mean, I guess you're beating their preparation is what it is in a lot of cases.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things about constructed Magic and the way that competitive players try to play is they try to reduce the impact of randomness as much as possible.
Right.
So that they can control the possibilities. And one of those ways of doing that is to have your deck contain redundancy. So your deck is providing you consistent things every time. And one way is to get adapted to all of the strategies that are out there and sort of learn how to address them by rote. And so I take great pleasure in making Magic less like chess.
I think that's pretty awesome. This is making me think about deck consistency. And I know in some formats there's a lot of redundancy in terms of cards that are in the same color and kind of do the same thing, or in some larger formats, that's definitely the case, like if you get into Modern or Legacy or whatever. But there's also some decks that are pretty inconsistent. What would be the two extremes for you in terms of like a deck that you played a lot that really just did what it was supposed to do and did it very consistently versus something that was kind of a bit more inconsistent but great when it worked, terrible when it didn't work?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of classic examples in Magic of both those things. I think the classic example of the competitive Magic player who wants things to be consistent and is going and playing in their Friday night tournament every week is they play a control deck. So what you do is you slow the game down so that over time you'll draw the correct mix of cards so you know what you're going to get every time. And so control decks tend to be very, very consistent. And that consistency is a bit of a temptation for a lot of competitive players. Some players just tend always towards that. And I used to be that way. That was my first identity as a Magic player, is I always played control decks. And then the most random ones are the sort of crazy, crazy combo decks where you have to have a certain collection of cards together and then you can win on turn one or turn two. And I've played those a few times. I don't find it super satisfying.
Why is that it's not satisfying to you? I say this as a Storm enjoyer.
Yeah, totally. And I've played Storm a bit. I don't find it satisfying because for me, the fun of the game is to try to figure out the strategies within each game as you're playing them. Mm-hmm. And combo decks tend to try to ignore the opponent. Say, I'm going to not worry about what you're doing, and I'm just going to do what I'm doing over here. And I just don't enjoy solitaire as much. So actually, the deck I played that was the most random on the Pro Tour, it might be a good answer for your question earlier about was the craziest thing that we ever tried on the Pro Tour, was actually in your home of Berlin.
Okay.
Years ago. And there's a card called Second Sunrise in Magic, which does a very weird thing. It just brings back all the cards that went to the graveyard this turn right back into play. But cards going to the graveyard in a turn isn't that common. But it's based around all these sort of trinket cards that go to your graveyard, and then you play Second Sunrise, and they come back, and all of the little trinkets make you draw more cards, so you can find another copy of the Second Sunrise. And actually, eventually, this became like a really, really good deck that was very popular and almost a problematically good deck. That happened after they printed a second copy of Second Sunrise,
I see.
Another sort of version of it. At the time, there wasn't a second copy, so we only had, you're allowed 4 of each card in Magic. And this deck was really fun to play in solitaire mode. And so in preparation for this tournament, my friend Jake Van Lunen and I got really obsessed with how this deck could win the game so fast and do really powerful things. And I think we didn't understand quite how inconsistent it was. Uh-huh. And also there was another really powerful strategy in our trying to identify the metagame and what was going to happen that we missed. We just did not recognize that it was as good as it was. And this tournament was won by that deck, which is an Elves-based deck.
Okay.
Anyway, a bunch of people on our team played this crazy deck in the tournament, and only one of us made it to the second day of competition, and that was me, and I did not do well after that, but I had to scrap and claw to get there. And, we were so excited going into the tournament because we thought we had something really different and unique and fun. And it went poorly, but if I had taken risks like that more often, I might have played that same deck 5 years later when it was good. Right? So that was a pretty wild strategy. But yeah, I think the thing for me with the combo decks is that you're trying to take the element of what your opponent's doing out of the game as well. And so you're trying to reduce variance in that way. And that's just not as interesting to me. I like the variance of what my opponent.
Yeah, it's like you're only fighting against the variance of your draw, right? It's like you're just trying to set yourself up so that if you get the right 7 or mull to 6, then you can win on turn 2 or whatever.
Yeah, if Magic were that game, I never would have fallen in love with it. And so I think that's part of why I don't like this strategy.
What is the deck you played that was kind of the most consistent? Like just did the thing that it was supposed to do? Like the redundancy was there and whatever else. Was there something that kind of stood out in that way, especially if you were maybe involved in the design of it?
Yeah, there's a deck that I loved for a number of years that was in Modern, and it was a deck originally designed by my friend Conrad Kolos, who is a really interesting person and Magic player. He always thought about things in his own way. And it was based around sort of common strategy, a combination of two cards. One is Scape Shift, which allows you to sacrifice your lands, all your resources, and go find different ones from your deck and put them into play. And then a card called Valakut, which is a land that if it sees enough other lands that are all mountains, it deals damage for each land. So the idea is you'd get enough lands into play that you could play a Scape Shift, sacrifice all of them, go search up a Valakut and a bunch of mountains, and be able to deal enough damage to win the game in one spot. So this is sort of like a control combo deck where you have this combination of two cards, but you really only need one of them. So it's a one card, in a way, combo, because the Valakut card can just be in your library, and you just cast Escape Shift. So the idea of this deck was you had to get lands into play and prevent your opponent from winning the game. And it was very interactive because you were trying to, stop your opponent from doing things long enough for you to find the Escape Shift card and get the lands into play. And the big secret of this particular deck design was we learned that you needed the cards that you used to all be cantrips, meaning they replaced themselves. So everything that you used to stop your opponent from moving towards winning the game also drew you a card. So cards like Remand, which sort of stops your opponent's spell, but they get it back. But you get to draw a card as well. So everything either had to be a land to get more lands into play or something that would replace itself. And so the deck design had this really strong philosophy to it. And every time you played it, since it was very redundant in that way, and since you were drawing lots of cards, it was incredibly consistent. And I won a couple of tournaments with this deck, and so did Conrad. And it was a very, very fun version of like a combo deck.
It's like one card plus time.
Yes, exactly. So you were just buying time.
Yeah.
You just got to play this thing of like, how do I bob and weave and buy as much time as possible?
What mix of digital versus paper do you play in 2025?
Sadly, the mix is probably higher in digital. I host a draft at my home once a week. So that's the consistent paper Magic that I play. And then I'll go to an in-person tournament probably once a month. And online, it varies. But when I'm actually preparing for a tournament, I will play nearly every day online, at least an hour or two. But it's interesting in the modern era, it used to be playing online was sort of like just sitting there at the computer, plugging away. And now, I go on Discord and I'll be talking to other people who are practicing, who are friends, and we'll screen share and sort of play together. It makes it a lot more fun, but I still definitely prefer the paper version, being with other people.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I haven't played much in a while, but maybe I'll be inspired after our conversation or excited to play. I just haven't been paying attention, and I'm like, oh, is it like what? They just got an email that Spider-Man is going to be on my Magic cards or whatever. Like, I don't know, but it's okay. I don't look at the pictures much anyway, so it's fine.
Totally.
But like, yeah, I never made the arena conversion. And you know what? I was thinking about this earlier when you were talking about drafting. Is that like something for me dies a little bit that I don't play against the draft pool?
Yes.
Like that kind of like, that kills a little bit of joy for me somehow.
Yeah, I agree. It takes something out of it. And, the only way to do that online anymore is I think you can arrange your own drafts in Magic Online. But yeah, that's really an in-person experience now. And I will say, I love having the access to draft more often. I definitely draft on Arena a lot, and I enjoy it. So it's not as bad as I was afraid it would be when I went from pod drafting to league-based drafting.
For sure. I mean, like everyone I talked to has said that, right? They enjoy drafting still. For some reason, I held the grudge and I never made the transition. And so unfortunately I just play less Magic, but I need to get over it.
Maybe I would say Arena, they finally did that thing where they made the digital version of the game pleasant and nicely designed and sort of like aesthetically comfortable. And that's not a good thing for me. It's way too tempting to log into Arena and play.
Right.
I need to play less sometimes. So I will say, if you're gonna enter into it, go in with your eyes open. It's very addictive.
So that's it for this week. There is a bit more to the conversation, but in the interest of time, I think I'm actually going to package it together for maybe a second episode. We'll see how much we have left, but I think there might be another episode with Gabe coming. Thank you, as always, for listening. Thank you to Alex Epton for the music, and we'll be back soon. Bye.